in a hurry because we have so much to talk about. One of your favorite guests is back, Chris Turner. And I told Chris we've got the disclaimer ready and it's up and ready to go. And as you remember, Chris talks always about Afghanistan and the Middle East, and delighted always to have you back.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Okay, who's on first in Afghanistan?
You know, we have a new political change up there.
You just got back, you might just want to tell him that.
Yes, I did just get back. The new president, Ashraf Ghani, is a Gilgi. He's part of the Pashto tribe that has been not ever really been represented politically. The Durrani part of the Pashto tribe has always been in power, 500 years. Karzai was Durrani. So other than Mullah Omar, who was a Gilgi, this is the first Gilgi president they've had.
Is that good or bad?
Well, I mean, it's good in the sense that he represents a majority of the people. Before, it was an elitist leadership, as in so many of these Muslim countries with the sheikhs or whoever. So it's nice to see at least someone who's from that same mentality. He's actually an American passport holder. He was a teacher here. He has a PhD. So he's a technocrat.
So his English is excellent.
He's an American. Yeah, he had to give up his American passport to become president.
Is he popular with?
You know, he was able to get elected because of the fact, I think, that he is from this part of the tribe that's never been represented. And I think they just got so tired of seeing the Durrani part of the tribe manipulate the funds and not give a majority of the people a taste of the profits from this war that's been going on.
Well, the Durrani went away with buckets of bucks.
Money, yeah. I mean, Karzai's family, besides being one of the largest opium members, his brother Wali, the family's made $1 billion. You know, we've spent $1 trillion.
Where is Karzai as we speak?
You know, he's still in Afghanistan, so he's still got so much power there. You know, I think when we made alliances with these different families or different tribal groups to be able to go into Afghanistan in 2001, we really didn't do our due diligence on who we were dealing with, because we've gotten in bed with a lot of the warlords that are doing the opium business. Right now, I think when the Taliban left in 2000, they had 150 metric tons of opium produced in Afghanistan. Today it's 7,000 tons.
Stored? Or
no, produced a year.
Oh, produced
This year will be the biggest year they've had, and it's 7,000 tons. So the fact that we align ourselves with families like the Karzai family that are in the opium business, and we've chosen them as our political allies, then we've in a way closed a blind eye to the production of heroin. I mean, heroin right now, they're saying that Afghanistan's responsible for 90% of the world's supply.
See, I don't understand why we just can't pay them for the stuff and burn it up.
Well, you know, I think again, when you take a crop, a kilo of heroin on the streets of New York, it's hard to fathom what it's really worth, but you know, literally hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so when you can produce a kilo of vegetable matter as cheaply as they can do it, and it turns out, you know, it's worth $250,000, it's hard to substitute.
Who should we have chosen other than the Karzai family to align ourselves with?
Oh, you know, I think one of the problems we've always faced when we're doing these political deals is that we want somebody who speaks English. You know, we feel really alienated if we can't talk to them. So I think that was the first thing that I think motivated us to go the direction we went. He was an American Afghan, as the president now is an American Afghan.
Well, it might have been a happy accident if we had sent somebody that spoke Pashto.
Well,
or whatever.
Yeah, I think that it's barely our position to go in and say who should be ruler.
Yeah, well, that's true. But that's not to say that we haven't inserted ourselves in those matters.
We have, and the level of corruption that our financial aid to that country has been able to facilitate is astronomical. I mean, it's the most corrupt country in the world by UN standards right now.
Well, I've been there close. I was in northern China, right on that border between Uzbekistan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and China. And there's nothing beautiful about that country, I have to tell you.
No, Afghanistan is a barren place. And the war, we've had now 30 years of civil war. actually 40 years of war with the Russian occupation. They've defoliated the country. They've really butchered it. Their herds, which was their really livelihood, they were nomads by nature. Their herds have been destroyed.
So really, there's no other way to make a living.
They really
than
there
the
really
poppies.
isn't. There really isn't. You know, if you could ever develop some security in the country, then you could get some foreign investors to come in. But right now, the government is so corrupt. The judicial system is so corrupt. In fact, one of the things that's making the Taliban even stronger today is that the poor man can't get justice under the civil government because he can't afford to pay for it.
Can this president make that change?
Oh, I think he's one man. I think he's struggling. I have faith that he's done a lot of positive things in the short time he's been there, but to stop the corruption's impossible. It's gotten too big, it's gotten too powerful. One man will never do it. And he's a technocrat. And as we all say, it's great to be intelligent, but there has to be somebody with a gun somewhere along the troop here.
That's true. That's true. With
And
a
he
bullet,
doesn't carry
with
a
a
gun.
bullet in
He
it.
doesn't carry a gun.
Yeah. Yeah. Well.
So he's at best handicapped.
So what would you then prognosticate as the future for Afghanistan?
You know, right now, and I say this from some, last time I was there, I wanted to really find out what was going on. I think the Gilgis, the president's done a deal with the Taliban because, you know, the Gilgis are the Taliban. It is the poor people of the Pashto tribe that started the Taliban movement. Mullah Omar is a Gilgi. They've done a deal where they're not fighting at all in the south, because the South's pretty much been their territory anyway. And now they're directing all the violence, the Taliban violence, into the north, which has been traditionally a Tajik, Uzbeki, Turkmen area. So really the concept is now
Those
the
are
Pashtus.
the people with the gray eyes.
Yeah. Now the Pashtus are going to try to take over their old rival, the northern tribes,
That's
using
not
the
good.
Taliban.
That's not so good.
And so the Taliban's taken over Kunduz, Mazar. They're controlling right up to the edge of Kabul.
Well, you know, I just read where the Taliban are getting less of a power, and the ISIS folks are getting stronger because we've killed off the two, you know, big guns in the
Well,
in
you
the
know,
Taliban.
I think you know, this PR that we've given ISIS, or ISIL, or
Whatever.
Daesh, whatever you want to call them, has been greatly helped their cause. I mean, there's no way you can talk about them good or bad without giving them notoriety. And notoriety is what they want. When you have a disenfranchised Muslim living in the West, what better fodder for their battles than that person? And he's so easily attracted to this because of all the importance we've given it. I wish we could stop the journalists from even talking about it, to be honest
That's
with you.
right. But are they getting stronger?
Well, I mean, ISIS right now is growing on the ground. They're not retreating. They're taking over cities that we'd taken away from them. Ramallah being one of them.
Yeah.
So I mean, as much, and it's amazing how much air power we've dedicated to the cause of blowing them up, and unsuccessfully.
So I read someplace too that the Taliban was run like a really first-class business. In other words, there were benefits to being involved with the Taliban, and they got paid, and they.
You know, I think all of these, ISIS, I know, if their soldiers capture a non-Muslim girl, they can enslave her, do whatever they please, and then they have slave markets every Monday in their major areas where they sell these captives. So it's an incentive to the soldier to capture these.
Well, and they get
non-Muslim.
paid regularly too.
And they get paid regularly, and they pay not in currency but in gold and silver, which is the way the Turks are buying the oil. So they're being paid in gold because they're circumnavigating the banking systems.
Well, that's a little heavy to clank around.
It
with
really
that
isn't
stuff.
at $1,200 an ounce. It's surprisingly, silver
Well,
dollars an ounce. It's
Everybody's
$1,200.
kind of bent over with everything hanging around their neck, I guess.
They say they're going to start producing coins. That's their comment.
Gold and silver coins.
And copper.
That's interesting. Well, to some degree, even though it's not as very positive, they're putting together a system.
Yeah, and people need direction, and they're being given direction. And it's, and that was one of the powers the Taliban had over the masses, is that they were very, very regimented. You have to do your prayers. You have to get up and pray 5 times a day. You have to, as the Muslims are all supposed to do, but the Taliban really enforced it. And again, I think people find a little bit of comfort, as you said, in that system, in the social order. And it was we made it so chaotic by stirring up the pot over there.
Yeah, we did.
That perhaps.
Well, I feel obliged to ask you, what is the situation for women now that the Taliban is not as strong?
Oh, that situation has never been very strong.
No, I
Even
know.
at the best of our efforts.
So it's not any better?
Oh, it's worse.
Oh, it's worse.
Yeah, I mean the attitude.
How could it be worse?
In the UAE, which is a very civilized, we consider a very civilized Muslim world.
Yes.
Dubai is kind of a place to be.
Yes.
The punishment for rape is less than the punishment for theft. So this in general, the Muslim world has degraded women's rights or women's so badly that it's not getting better.
Well, that puts things in a very miserable
It
perspective.
does. Karzai had a case that was brought up by Hillary Clinton. Brought it up. A young girl had been raped by a member of the village. She got pregnant because the man that raped her was married. He didn't commit adultery, but she was unmarried. So they put her in prison. She had the baby in prison. After 3 years in prison, they finally released her on the basis, Karzai's agreement with the West, released her if she would marry the rapist, which she did.
Oh, my. Let's talk about Pakistan. Where is Pakistan in all this? Because they have been a rather disruptive force.
Pakistan, in my mind, is really the most unlooked at problem that we have over there. I don't know what our insistence on trying to ignore what they've done to Afghanistan, but they've been a terrible influence. ISI has supported bin Laden, supported the Haqqani groups, have supported all the Taliban groups since day one, since the beginning, and we just ignored it. I mean, bin Laden was living openly. In Pakistan,
yeah.
In a military town. So it's obvious to everybody over there that, and again, we just seem to not want to stir that nest. So we ignore the problem. So the Pakistani government is actually wanting to diminish Afghanistan so that they can gain more control. The same thing Iran's doing. So Afghanistan has two very hostile neighbors that are doing everything they can.
It's not very comfortable.
Oh, they're in a terrible position. They really are. And the only thing that gives them any kind of power is that it's such, as you said, such a barren place.
Ooh.
It's such a very hostile environment.
You have to have a magnifying glass to find a blade of grass. I mean,
there's nothing. There's
nothing there.
Yeah, there's
nothing. I was right where the Khyber Pass comes through from Pakistan.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, great area, the Khyber Pass. That's no man's land. That's the tribal territory, still controlled. That's an autonomous area, still. To this day. To this day, it's still autonomous.
So everybody isn't in a mess. They're not afraid. Everybody isn't afraid to go outside or.
Oh, the Afghans are so conditioned to the violence that it doesn't bother them. They live, very normal lives in a lot of ways.
And are the children going to school?
The school situation isn't that great, but they are going to school. To be honest with you, the attitude from the Muslims is that women shouldn't be educated and men should be educated in the Quran. So the school to them is the madrasa, which is the mullah giving lessons.
That's where a lot of the problems come through the madrasas. Because
that is the problem. The bad mullahs have distorted the true meaning of, the idea of getting 50 lashes. When Muhammad described the process, you're supposed to put an egg under your arm so you can't get much leverage. That man in Saudi Arabia that was sentenced to 1,000 lashes for what he said or wrote.
That's right. That's a lot.
Can't survive. And at 50, they're afraid to give him any more.
Oh. Well, it's really kind of interesting because we say, well, the religion and the Quran is it's their life, but that's probably the only book they've read.
Legally, if you study the Quran, that's all you're supposed to study. You're not supposed to read any other books because it's all blasphemy.
And they don't know anything about anything else.
No, my tribal leader was the first of his tribe to go to. He was a nomadic tribe to go to college, and he went to Kabul University under the Taliban because they controlled the city of the country for 5 years. So he got an engineering degree in IT, information technology. And they called him, to this day they call him the engineer. and I asked him what he learned, and he said, well, we didn't have any electricity. And there's a very famous photograph when the Taliban took over Kabul University. They pulled all the computers out and drove tanks over them. Very famous shot that was taken by a journalist at the time. So they had no computers. He said, we had one Pashto book, English translated into Pashto, on computers. He thought computer was a guy. He thought email was a meal. He asked me, when do you get that email? When do you get that meal? So he had, he got a 5-year degree, and all he did is study more religion.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back just a minute and talk about Iraq. And when we first went into Iraq and Mr. Bremer destroyed the military, everybody was out. That was not a very good move. What happened to those people?
Well, again, I think what you have to realize is that when we put the regime in power that you're speaking of, we put them in power. When we put them in power, they were a minority group. The Baathists are Sunni. Most of Iraq is Shia.
Yeah, but the Baathists are really a minority.
Well, they're a Shia group that's even a finer minority.
Yeah.
But the bottom line was we put a minority group in power. Well, by then giving them as much power as we did, or as much as they took in time, they were able to control the minority. Well, once we took them out of power, then we created a vacuum, and the minority wasn't in a position to, and they discriminated against the Sunnis and caused a lot of trouble for themselves by doing so. ISIS is now being manned a lot by these Sunnis that were part of that minority that controlled Iraq.
That got displaced.
That got displaced, yeah.
Well, when you provide a vacuum, somebody moves in to fill it.
Exactly, and I think the radicals that moved in, and again, it appeals to people of a very simple nature, this discipline, this religious discipline that they give them.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's no question about what you have to do every day.
No, and if you think so, it may hurt.
They'll straighten you up.
That's right, that's right. Let's talk a little bit about the sheikhs. Nobody talks much about them, and they are not without power.
Oh, and I feel sorry for, there have been so many Western businessmen that have gone into the UAE thinking that they'd get some civil liberties, who are now in debtor's prison. I think one reason we rebelled so in our culture from the British was to stop debtor's prison, so that you couldn't be thrown in jail because you owed $10 to somebody. Well, they're still doing that, and there are wealthy businessmen, Americans, Indians, that are in prison, are actually detained under house arrest and cannot leave because they have a debt, a financial debt. And again, there are no rules. The sheikh is the ultimate power, so whatever he says goes.
I have a little statue that I bought in Russia, and in Russian it says on the bottom, it's a hunter with a rabbit in his hand, and it says on the bottom, "I went out to hunt rabbits, and before me stood a bear."
Yeah, a good piece of advice.
That's right, and so that's what's happened, and I think people didn't realize the power that, they're a one-man band.
They're totally in control, a single individual. And I think right now, you're seeing it all through the famous Arab Spring. You're seeing these cultures beginning to realize, and I think the advent of cell phones and tweeting and Facebook, and they're communicating with each other, and they're all standing up and going, why does this family get everything? Why is this the royal family? Yeah,
but if you look at Libya and you look at Egypt, they're struggling something terrible.
Oh, I agree, and I think a totalitarian government in a very primitive environment is effective, and there's no denying it.
There is no denying it.
Yeah, and I think something else that we have to face up, and as much as it's difficult for us to understand, violence, terror, these things work. Beheading people is
well, you do have to admit that you think twice if you're going to lose your head.
Or your hand.
Or your hand, that's right.
Yeah. So, these things do work, especially in primitive environments. So for us to go in and say, oh, no, we can't do any of this anymore, we're going to have this more civilized social order, it doesn't work.
No.
It doesn't work.
No, because they're so unused to that they, anarchy is a real mess. And that's sort of what, I was in Syria, and, we walked around 11 o'clock at night.
Sure, no
Are you
problem.
afraid? No. And somebody said to us when we got, weren't you afraid? I said, no. Wouldn't you think twice if you were going to lose your hand if you took somebody's billfold?
Again, when you once really enforce Sharia law, it puts the fear of God into people. The Taliban cut off 20,000 right hands when they first took over the country, just to get the message,
hands.
and executed women for adultery at the half times of the soccer games.
And there's the key. Everybody saw it.
Again, that's the point. And you see that man walking around about his hand. These are very visual effects.
Indeed.
And have very strong messages. Kabul was controlled by the Taliban, and none of the Taliban police carried weapons. They carried a cable, a metal cable that could kind of whip you with if you gave them trouble. But nobody carried a gun. That's how much control they had. I mean, you look at the streets of Kabul now, and the police have 50 caliber machine guns mounted on the top of Humvees at every corner.
So I'm inferring from this conversation that you don't think a democracy is going to work in the Middle East.
Oh, again, I think you have to, culture has to mature intellectually before you can have. And again, do you think we really have a true democracy? I mean, let's look at the advertising budgets for the last campaign, $1 billion per side. Now, if that's letting me make conscious decisions based on my own, they wouldn't have to spend that much money.
Yeah, well, that's right.
So I think we're being directed.
Propaganda is a very strong bullet.
It is.
It is. Let's talk about the Saudis. They're finding a little more of a voice outside of their country these days.
You know, I think, and I've had, and being over there and being around these people recently, I think this attitude of perhaps these royal families aren't going to have the longevity that they expected, perhaps. And if historically the Saudis really took power, the Saudi family that we now recognize took power after the First World War. So I think they're perhaps looking at their own mortality.
Getting a little nervous.
And yes, pumping out as much oil as they can. Because they're certainly going against OPEC and all the other partners by selling the oil so cheap.
Well, they do. And, you know, I read that that Senegal, of all places, sent 2,000 troops or so to provide security to the holy shrines in Medina and Mecca.
Yeah, you know, and I've spoken to so many contractors that have worked in Saudi and worked with the Saudis, and we've been supporting them financially and with our purchase of oil for decades. They're not good fighters. I think the Israeli wars that they've had with the Arabs have proved that point. They're not really good fighters, so their level of education is limited, as we mentioned, so
That's
it's
right.
harder to train them on the technical things, like flying on Apache helicopters or flying, you know, they just don't take to it as easily.
Well, no, and you know, it's kind of interesting because the Sudan sent a special operations advisor, right along with what you're saying, to Saudi Arabia. And, you know, Sudan was formerly an Iranian ally.
Yeah.
You know, the bedfellows are sort of changing here.
You know, and that's an interesting thing you would mention that. And one of the things that gives, and the Saudi royal family are Wahhabis. And it's kind of a radical form of Islam, very similar to the Shias in some ways. Mm-hmm. So in the sense of wanting to really sponsor more Sharia law, and really enforcing Sharia law, those two have more in common than you would think. Because they're not Sunnis. They're not the Sunni-Shia rivalry that we think of traditionally. The Wahhabis are much closer to.
So it's a problem of traditional and non-traditional.
Yeah, the Wahhabis are yes, exactly. So many of the Sunnis have become more liberal. So many of the Sunni-dominated countries are not following, per se, the strict law. Where the Wahhabis have been very forceful. I mean, they're, you know, that man being thrown in for his blog, they've examples of very high-ranked families executing their daughters for honor killings because the daughter spoke to or, you know, did something inappropriate.
Well, and often that's only within the country. When some of the Saudis leave the country,
oh,
they
it's completely
forget.
different. It's completely different, and it's a very hypocritical environment. I mean, Saudi Arabia is the largest buyer of single malt Scotch in the world. Well, where's that from? You know,
Yeah.
the punishment for alcohol is death.
Where did I see a picture not too long ago of they're cleaning out bottles? There was a whole pile of
bottles. Yeah.
bottles.
Yeah. So it's very hypocritical. And if you look at places like Dubai, Dubai is literally a mecca for the Saudis to go and do things they can't do in Saudi Arabia. You know, in Saudi Arabia, you're talking about women's rights. They still can't drive. You know, women haven't been liberated at all in Saudi Arabia. They wear the most strict of the costumes.
Many of them have been well educated, though.
You know, and that's going to bite them. That's going to come back to bite them, I believe. I think.
Good, I hope so.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And that's one of the tenets of the whole Sharia process of this whole is not to let the women get educated. You know?
Keep them in the kitchen,
of
kitchen
course.
barefoot.
The tribal leader that I worked for said, you educate a woman, she turns into a dragon and bites you. That was his little crude description of
and
English.
they might say, and don't forget that.
And don't forget that.
But that is true.
Yes.
Because some of these women are very well educated. They have doctorates from
yes.
London and from Paris and the United
and those
States.
are the wealthier families have allowed their women to be educated. But still, it goes against so much of what they're still doing with the women. They're still enforcing arranged marriages. They're not allowing you to pick your mate. You know, you basically see them on the day of your wedding.
So it's somewhat of a dichotomy.
It is much so, yeah, much so. And I think it's going to give them trouble.
Do you believe that the countries of sub-Saharan Africa are going to become more seen as actors in this drama?
Well, I think you know, as far as
I mean, now we're talking about
as far as manpower. I think
Yeah.
I think for sure manpower.
Yeah.
I think you know
But education's a problem there too.
definitely is a problem there.
Yeah.
And they don't have, again, our concern, if we think of ourselves and our involvement with the Muslim world, our concern is pretty concentrated in an area that's very oil dominated. So I think part of our interest in that area is predicated on the fact that we're,
Well, of course.
5% of the world consuming 50% of its oil.
Why would anybody be interested in rocks and sand?
Exactly. And the difficulties that
Brings.
population
Oh,
has.
yes, absolutely. And
has.
I'm sure that it crosses the Saudis' minds because, you know, nobody works really hard in these countries.
You know, they don't. And without that income that we're providing them with the oil, then they wouldn't be able to develop the way they've developed. Right now, UAE has maybe 500,000 local residents and 4.5 million foreign workers. And the local residents, as you said, don't work.
No, they don't.
I had a teacher tell me that one of his students comes to class, leaves his Ferrari running in the parking lot for an hour and 15 minutes until the class is over, so it's nice and cool when he gets back in it.
That's sad. That's sad.
But-
Let's talk about Syria for
Yeah.
a minute. I've been to Syria, as I told you, and some of the ancient ruins in Syria, Palmyra, for example, I saw not too long ago that it was in danger. Why?
Well, you know, part of the tenets of the Muslim faith is no idol worshiping. When Muhammad took over the Middle East, or his religion took over the Middle East, one of the most important things they had to enforce was people don't have imagery that they worship. So this whole thing of putting your arms like this instead of like this, because they wanted to shake, because people were hiding things in their sleeves. So Muhammad said, do like this before, as you pray. That's one of the movements, you know, to make sure there's nothing up your sleeve. So, you know, the reason the Taliban destroyed Bamiyan, the oldest Buddha in the world.
Oh, the Bamiyan Buddhas, that's
yeah,
terrible.
the reason they destroyed that is because in the Muslim faith, there is no tolerance towards any kind of idol worshiping. And unlike the cross or the Star of David, any of these symbols that other religions have, the Muslims don't really have a symbol. In fact, they go to the extreme of there's really no Muslim art. I mean, the Muslims express themselves in geometric patterns. If you look at their carpets,
Beautiful. And
their
passages
tile
in the
works.
Quran.
Yes, and yes, the calligraphy passages from the Quran. But Muhammad said, trying to stop people worshiping things out of nature, he said it's really not right for a man to reproduce something out of nature. So to draw something or sculpt something out of nature and then give it value or worship it or whatever was against his teachings.
Well, and at one period, the very early Jews did not do that either. They
Didn't
did
allow.
not.
Yeah.
They did not. So it's, you know, some things are not unique with one group, but
You know,
things change.
But if you read the Quran, which I've had the good fortune of being able to do more than once, in English, they have all the Old Testament. I mean, you can't be a good Muslim without believing in Jesus. Mary is one of their prophets. They think very highly of the Virgin Mary. And Abraham, Moses, these are all in the Quran.
Yeah.
These legends or stories or whatever have been passed on.
And I guess that's why I find things so difficult is that there are more samenesses than there are differences
yeah.
in all of us.
You know, and I'm quick to point out to the Muslims when they start debating religion with me is that their main comment is La ilaha illallah, which means there is only one God, which is exactly the same God that we all have prayed to now for thousands of years.
And I have to say, Chris Turner, thanks so much
No
for
problem.
being with us.
Thank you.
And I would remind you that we are all children of God, of Abraham, of Moses,
Yes,
of
exactly.
all of the history that has come before us. So thank you very much. And thank you,
I
Chris.
appreciate it.
And I look forward to our next visit
Thank you.
and to yours. It's our community, you know.